Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into this webinar. My name is Casey Dunn, and I'm the Employer Relations Coordinator here at Marquette University in the Career Services Center. Today, I'm going to be talking all about conducting on-campus interviews here at Marquette. I want to start off and say that whenever I do these kinds of webinars, I feel like I'm hosting my very own podcast, which is really exciting for me. So thanks again for listening and for making that little dream of mine come true. The reason I'm going to be talking about on-campus interviews today is that it's really a great way to engage with students at Marquette and literally establish your presence and your brand here on campus. For those of you on the call who don't know, in my previous role before I came to Marquette, I used to be in talent acquisition for a company here in Milwaukee. And I always used to love coming to Marquette to do these kinds of interviews. So I have firsthand knowledge of how useful this can be in recruiting students to join your team. So what are we going to be talking about here today? This is, pardon me. This is really going to be a high-level view of why you might want to conduct on-campus interviews here at Marquette, and then how to go about setting up your interview schedule. So the next half hour or so, I'm going to talk a little bit about Marquette specifically, and then give a brief overview of what you can expect when you conduct on-campus interviews here. I'll talk about some of the advantages of interviewing on campus to kind of set yourself and your company apart. I'll review options for scheduling your interviews, and then I'll take you into Handshake and walk you through the process of setting up and requesting those interviews. And then I'll go over some kind of general best practices. And now when I say that we use Handshake, if you're not sure what Handshake is or you've never used it before, this would be a great introduction. And then please do reach out to me after the call. We can get you set up with your free Handshake account. Now, if at any point during the webinar you have questions, please feel free to send them in the chat box, and I will save time at the end to address some of those questions. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a brief moment to talk about Marquette University and why you'd even want to recruit here in the first place. So when I was in my former role in talent acquisition, students at Marquette were always some of my favorite candidates, and I hope that those of you on the call who have recruited here kind of back me up on that. And the reason is that Marquette's identity as a Catholic Jesuit institution really translates to students having this ingrained sense of passion and social responsibility. The students here really want to make a positive, meaningful difference in the world in a way that, in my experience, is unparalleled. And that's not just a talking point. A Marquette education is really designed and, in fact, newly redesigned specifically to encourage that passion to make an impact. So starting with the class of 2018, Marquette introduced what's called the core curriculum that all students experience. And the courses within that core curriculum are designed by nature to be cross-disciplinary and to build essential life skills and really create well-rounded students. So some of those key learning outcomes and those core competencies of this curriculum are here on the screen. And I won't read them to you, but I want to point out that these learning outcomes really align with the competencies that we talk about in the world of recruiting and talent acquisition, right? So communication, engagement, collaboration, leadership, problem solving, solving global problems. Throughout their time at Marquette, students are going to learn a lot of important skills and gain a lot of important knowledge, but it's all built on this foundation, right? So it's all about how do you take your passion and do something with it. So I thought it was important to start there with the why. Why are we even having this conversation before diving into the topic of the day, which is on-campus interviewing. So this is a picture of one of our interview rooms here in our office. That's me pretending to interview one of our student office assistants. We have 7 interview rooms in total that you can reserve, and they're all basically like this one. They do vary in size just a little bit. So if you're coming in for interviews and you plan on having multiple interviewers in a single room, just let me know ahead of time and we can see about reserving a slightly larger room for you, but they are basically all the same. Now on the day of your interviews, you'll check in at our front desk here in the Career Services Center, and then you'll be escorted back to your interview room. And from there, that room is basically yours for the day. So when students come in for an interview, we'll have them check in at the front desk, and then they'll wait in the lobby, and then you can come out and kind of collect them at your own pace. And I want to reiterate, if I haven't said it yet, that this is a totally free service for employers. So while we do require you to reserve a room in advance, we don't charge for that reservation. We also offer complimentary coffee, tea, and snacks in our break room, which is why in this photo you see that I am taking full advantage of the free coffee. There's also free Wi-Fi, of course. If you have a break in your schedule, you can get some work done, maybe answer some emails. In talking about the advantages of on-campus interviews, I want to throw some numbers up on the screen to give a sense of what our interviews looked like last semester. So fall 2019, we had 48 employers who utilized our space for on-campus interviews. That was Fortune 500 companies, local nonprofits, really the full gamut. And altogether, those employers interviewed 348 students. And most of those interviews took place in the weeks following our fall career and internship fair that happened at the end of September. Now, out of those 48 employers, 36 were returning employers, which means that they also conducted on-campus interviews the year prior, and in most cases, also the year before that. Some of our employer partners return year after year, semester after semester, which is a really great way to build brand over time. When students see you coming back to campus to recruit for jobs, internships, service, whatever your opportunities are, they start to see your name and recognize your brand as accessible and student-friendly, and they start to associate your organization with career possibilities. And beyond that, on-campus interviews are just an incredibly efficient way to meet with numerous students in a single day. So a typical interview schedule in a single room may have 13 interview slots that are 30 minutes each, and that's including time for you to get lunch and take a few breaks throughout the day. And that's just one room. Some of our employer partners who have been doing this for a while and have really established a name for themselves, they may reserve multiple interview rooms at once. In fact, this fall we had one employer, a larger company, who received 122 applications to various job postings. So they reserved 6 rooms, and they ended up meeting with 61 students over the course of the day, and they ended up extending offers to 15 of those students. That's nearly 25% of students who are interviewed receiving an offer. That employer was thrilled with those results. That's highly efficient. On the other side of things, we also had a smaller organization who reserved a single room. They interviewed 6 students and actually extended offers to 3 of those students. So that's 50% of students. Half of the students that they interviewed received an offer. That's a great use of time for that employer. And keep in mind that even the students who don't get the job offer, who aren't quite the right fit for that role, they have friends on campus and classmates and people they know through clubs and sports teams. And they talk, right? Students talk, we know this. So even though in the interview they ended up not being the right fit, they're still talking to their friends around campus and spreading the word that A, you're hiring, and B, you're willing to come to campus. And again, it's all about building brand and building that accessibility. What it all really comes down to ultimately is the fact that you're making yourself stand out as an employer who's, again, literally a part of this campus and who actively wants to recruit students. You want students to recognize your company's name and think, that's someplace that I could work. Okay, so now on to kind of the nuts and bolts of how to schedule your interviews in Handshake. Most of the time, this is where you would start in Handshake. When you request an interview through Handshake, it really streamlines the process. It sends me a notification that you've requested to reserve an interviewing space, and I can look and make sure everything looks right and confirm that reservation with you. If you're not sure about something, you can always contact me directly. But if you know what date you want and you know how to set up your interviews, by all means, just go ahead and submit that request through Handshake, and it'll come straight to me. Now, the first thing you need to decide, there are 3 formats for on-campus interviews. So when you request an interview through Handshake, the first thing is that you pick one of these formats. The first is what's called a pre-select schedule, and this is generally the preferred format. What it means is that you're using Handshake to manage your applications and select your candidates. Those candidates then use Handshake to select their interview time slots, and then Handshake is going to be sending out automated communication throughout that whole process, and it all happens directly right there in Handshake. It's called pre-select because after students apply, you are pre-selecting which candidates you'd like to interview. And again, all happens in Handshake. The next format is an open schedule, which is really rarely used. In fact, out of the 48 employers in fall 2019, we had 1 employer who used the open schedule. And in this format, any student who applies to your job posting can automatically select an interview time slot. So as long as they meet your basic requirements, things like minimum GPA or class year, they would get a slot. Again, this is really rarely used because you don't get to pre-select your candidates. Anyone who meets your qualifications gets to sign up. And then the last format is room only, and that's exactly as it sounds. With this format, you're literally just requesting an interview room, and you won't be using Handshake for any of the application process. Some employers use this if they have their own ATS software, and they really prefer to just use that to organize applications and just not use Handshake. One thing with a room-only interview schedule is that because students aren't applying directly through Handshake, my team and I aren't really able to facilitate that application process with you. With a pre-select schedule, you get kind of a hands-on concierge model of service, meaning that my team and I here in the Career Services Center can keep an eye on your interview schedule leading up to that interview date to make sure that the application numbers are where they're supposed to be, help troubleshoot if they're not, and just make sure everything looks good and everyone's meeting all their deadlines. Another advantage of the pre-select schedule over the room-only schedule is that with pre-select, once you tell Handshake which candidates you'd like to interview, the system automatically notifies those candidates via email and prompts them to select their interview time slot. So it all happens automatically, and that doesn't happen if you're not using pre-select. So just another reason that we prefer that format, and employers generally prefer that format. I have seen it happen, that an employer has made a room-only reservation, and due to some miscommunication within their company, their student candidates were never notified that they had been selected for interviews. So the employer showed up to our office and there were unfortunately no students there to meet with. Now, if they had used a pre-select format, that communication would have happened automatically. And in addition to that, I would have been able to see on the schedule days in advance that none of the applicants had picked a time slot, and I would have been able to help troubleshoot that. So again, that's why we say that we prefer the pre-select format. It really does just kind of streamline the process and add in some additional fail-safes to make sure that things work smoothly. Now, before I pull up Handshake and kind of walk through the process of scheduling interviews, I want to talk about the typical timeline if you are going to use that pre-select format. To start, every pre-select interview is associated with at least one job posting. That's important because students don't actually apply for the interview itself, right? So they apply to one of the associated jobs, and then if you select their application as someone you like to interview, then they're invited to choose their time slot. So the first date that needs to be decided is when the job application opens. Typically, we recommend having that post live for 3 to 4 weeks to give students time to find it and get their application together and submitted. Next is the application deadline, which obviously is when students can no longer submit an application. And then from there, you'll generally have 1 to 3 days to review applications and to decide who you'd like to interview. At that employer deadline, that's when Handshake will send out emails to your selected candidates. So it's important that you make your selections during that window. And typically, again, that's 1 to 3 days for you to do that. Next, the students who have been selected will have about 2 to 5 days to sign up for an interview time slot. And then after that sign-up deadline, you'll generally have 1 day to really tie up any loose ends before your interview. If there's anyone who needs to switch time slots or move things around, you want to have that kind of buffer day to tie up those loose ends. Now, this timeline is not something you necessarily need to memorize. In fact, as you'll see in a moment here, it's actually baked into the interview request process in Handshake. So helpful to go over it now, but it's not something that you need to commit to memory by any means. And now the plan that I had was to pull up Handshake on my end and kind of walk through it live with you. Our internet is moving a little bit slow today, so I'm going to actually switch to plan B, which is just to pull up some screenshots that I took. So this is what Handshake looks like. I apologize that you won't be able to see it live, but the screenshots are all there, so we can kind of walk through it together there. So when you log into Handshake, this is the view that you'll see as an employer. You'll see that there is, right there in the middle, there's a spot, request an interview with that red arrow. Through that, you can request an interview. It's right there on your homepage, front and center. If you ever lose track of where it is, you're somewhere else in Handshake, you don't see that button, over there on the left by that other red arrow, you can always click that interview spot as well. Either way, when you click it, you're going to be taken to this screen. The first thing you decide is what school you like to interview at. You can type in Marquette University, it will pop up from the drop down, you can select us. You'll put in the names of who from your company will be attending the interview. If you don't know this yet, if you're not sure who you'll be sending, you can leave this blank. It's not a required field. You'll name the interview, usually something like Summer 2020 Internship, some general idea about what the job is. And then you'll put a description about what students can expect. Then down there at the bottom, by the red arrow, you'll click Next. It'll take you to the screen and you'll be able to select your interview date. Now I know that there is a career fair coming up on February 18th, so I might want to select February 19th to to do interviews. I might want to meet with students during the career fair and then do interviews the following day here on campus. So February 19th is the date that I'll pick from the dropdown. And once I pick that date, I'm given this pop-up. You'll see at the top, February 19th, 2020 is the date. That field alternate date is just a helpful note that comes to me. Students don't see that. It just means that if we are already booked up on the 19th, is there a second date that would work for you as a plan B? So you might say that February 19th is your preferred date, but as an alternate date, the following day, the 20th, would work as well. You'll put in the number of rooms that you'll need, and then you'll enter in the details. That might just, again, be a helpful note to me that you might have 2 interviewers in that single room. And you'll click Add Date. And then here is where you're going to be picking that interview format. So again, pre-select, open, or room only. Generally, pre-select is going to be that preferred format. Once you select that button, you're going to see here all those dates that we just talked about on that timeline. Like I said, they're baked in, so you don't have to memorize how long you're supposed to leave for each phase of the process. If you want to adjust any of those dates, just let me know. Give me a call, shoot me a quick email, and I'm happy to adjust any of those dates on my end for you. Then you'll want to scroll down and pick your template for the interviews. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, etc. For this example, we'll just go with 30 minutes. And then you click Next down there at the bottom again. So this is where you're going to attach a job, because again, remember with the pre-select schedule, there needs to be a job posting that's active in Handshake for students to apply to. Students apply to the job, and then once they're selected, they're invited to the interview. There's 3 ways you can do it. On the left, you can create a new job, which takes you to a screen where you'll enter all the information just as if you were posting a job for the first time. Copy job details, that's copying an existing job, or use an existing job. The reason that I've drawn this arrow here to copy job details is that it's really the preferred feature here. If you use an existing job over there on the right, you are literally taking a job that's already posted in Handshake and attaching it to this interview schedule. Now, if that job is posted to multiple schools, you're attaching all of it to our interview schedule. And once that interview happens, that job expires. It expires at Marquette and it expires at any other schools where it's posted. So if you're posting a job to multiple schools, you're going to want to copy the job details and create a duplicate job to represent the interviews here at Marquette. And then if you don't have any of that information yet, you're still waiting for your HR department to approve the job description, something like that. If the job is not set, you can always click Remind Me later, and it'll prompt you later. But for this example, we'll click on that Copy Job Details. Pulls up this pop-up. You can select which active job you'd like to use as a template. And once you do that, you get this screen. This is going to be already filled out with all the information about that job you picked. So for this example, I picked our office assistant job. Now you can edit this, so you might want to enter something like interview on campus at Marquette, just as a designation so that when students see this and apply for this job, they already know that there's going to be an option to interview at Marquette. By no means is this required, it can just be kind of a helpful tool. Then you'll click Save. You'll know it worked because you'll see it listed there by that top red arrow. Office Assistant Interview on Campus at Marquette is now associated with this interview. You'll click Next again. The final screen is a review screen. It's going to show you all the information about your interview. Again, it's going to give you that timeline so you can review it there one more time before you submit the request. Once you hit that green request button, that sends me all this information, sends me the request so that I know that you would like to interview on campus. I can review it, make sure your timeline looks good, make sure everything is working the way it's supposed to, and then I'll reach out to you and confirm. So this is what you'll see once you hit that request button. That first red arrow at the top, you'll see that the interview, is listed as pending. That means that I haven't reviewed it yet, but I'll probably get to it within a day or so. And then down at the bottom by that second red arrow, you'll see related jobs. That's how you'll see again that that job that you associated with the interview has been added correctly. And then if you ever go back to your home screen, you'll see there right in the center that interview schedule has been requested and that it is still pending. So that's where you can check in. Now I'm gonna switch back to our PowerPoint here. Okay, so I just want to go over some general best practices for setting up your interviews and kind of making the most of your visit to campus. Now, when it comes to attaching jobs, again, I want to reiterate that the job posting expires when the application deadline ends. So again, this is really important if you have that same job posting active at multiple schools. If you want your job to stay active at those other schools, be sure to duplicate that job posting as we just walked through. And I mentioned that with a pre-select interview, you need to have an active job posting associated with your interview, because again, that's where students apply. Now, you are able to attach multiple jobs to a single interview schedule. If you're doing that, it can become a bit more cumbersome and more complicated if you're attaching more than, say, 2 to 3 jobs. It can be done. We've had employers who attach upwards of 10, 20 jobs to a single interview schedule, but it does get complicated. So if that's the case, if that's what you like to do, please reach out. I'm here to help. There's some more advanced features that I can walk you through that kind of make that easier. Now, some organizations, when they come for interviews, will bring a designated greeter on the day of their interviews. That's someone who is not conducting the interviews themselves, but just greeting students in the lobby, kind of having a warm-up conversation before the actual interview. While this isn't necessarily common, it is something we can accommodate. Just let us know ahead of time if you intend to bring a greeter so that we can reserve some additional space for you. We usually book a separate interview room for those conversations because our lobby just gets kind of crowded and isn't very conducive for those kinds of talks. Now, in terms of getting students to apply for your job posting, this part is really important. So you're likely going to want to engage in some other recruitment activity leading up to your interviews in order to spread the word. You want to spread the word that A, you're hiring, B, you're coming to campus. This is especially true if you're new to on-campus recruiting in general, and more specifically if you're new to on-campus interviews. We've seen cases where employers haven't done much or any outreach and just expect that students will find the job posting, will apply for it, will sign up for the interviews, that it's all going to happen. And in those cases, attendance tends to be pretty low. So we recommend kind of bundling your campus engagement for kind of multiple touch points with students. You might want to host a publicity table, reach out to student organizations, hold an info session. If you're interested in any of that, if you want to develop a more robust recruitment strategy, we're always happy to work with you to do so, so please do reach out. One thing that's helpful to that end is to let us know if you already have connections on campus, whether it's with faculty or other offices, and where you'd like to engage and what students you'd like to reach. Because once we have that information, we can do some appropriate outreach to our campus partners and kind of get the word out, spread the word about your visit. In general, a great way to develop that pipeline and kind of bundle those engagements is to reserve interview space in the days following one of our career fairs. So when you do that, you can meet students at the fair and then give them that immediate call to action and those concrete next steps. So you might meet a student that you have interest in, they're interested in roles of the organization, you think they're promising, and you can just say, by the way, I'll be on your campus this Friday doing interviews, here are the time slots that are still open, here's how you can sign up. I will say now that this is a very popular option, so if you're interested, please reach out sooner rather than later because we do book up rather quickly. And I'll give you my contact information again here at the end. So again, please do reach out if you're interested in reserving interview space in general, but especially if you want to book a space directly after one of our career fairs. We do have a couple of career fairs coming up that I'd like to kind of mention. We'd be happy to accommodate on-campus interviews after any one of these. First, coming up on February 18th is the Workforce Fair. This event is co-hosted by Marquette along with 20 other colleges and universities across the state. It's for all majors, all industries, and it takes place at the Wisconsin State Fairgrounds in the Expo Center just outside of Milwaukee. This event does have employer registration closing this Friday. So if you are interested in attending the event, please do reach out. You can register through Handshake. Again, if you're not sure about Handshake, just reach out to me directly and I can walk you through it. But again, registration for this Workforce Fair closes this Friday. Then February 20th is the Marquette Engineering Job Fair, which is focused on roles in engineering. So that includes mechanical, electrical, biomedical, construction, civil, environmental, as well as computer engineering, plus computer science and IT as well. Now this year, our Spring Career and Internship Fair is a 2-day event. On March 31st, we're going to have a Communications Professions Day, focusing on advertising, PR, marketing, journalism, digital media, corporate communication. Then April 1st, the following day, is Helping Professions Day, which is focusing on roles in human services, community development, mental health, healthcare, as well as research. Registration is open for all of these fairs on Handshake, but again, if you have questions, you're not sure about Handshake, you just want to sign up, you can reach out to me directly. And with that, I want to end just by kind of presenting contact information here, as well as contact information for our assistant director, that's Naomi Pollock. She's always happy to talk kind of big picture and discuss how you can develop a more robust, targeted recruitment strategy. Either one of us are always happy to help out, so you can reach out either way. I want to just say thank you once again for tuning in about what is really just a really helpful recruiting tool on campus interviewing and how to set up that schedule.